Grace Mitchell sank down on the floor of her rundown Brooklyn apartment, counting and recounting the 23 crumpled dollars in her hand. The fourth time, she prayed the number would change, but no miracle came. A miracle had never come for her. The eviction notice taped to the door gave her exactly 5 days. 5 days to come up with $900 in rent, plus $250 in late fees. Her hands trembled as she folded the bills and stuffed them back into her jacket pocket. Outside, thunder boomed so hard it rattled the window panes. Rain lashed the walls like angry fists. New York had never seen a storm this bad. Grace stared into the empty kitchen cabinet. 1 can of beans, half a loaf of bread, a packet of instant noodles. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She'd gotten used to that over the past 2 months. The lights flickered. She held her breath, praying the power wouldn't cut out. The electric bill was overdue, too. Everything was overdue. Her phone buzzed an automated message from the nursing home reminding her about Grandma Maggie's medical bill. $15,000. A number so big, it didn't even feel real anymore. 2 months ago, Grace had lost her job at Mount Sinai Hospital. Budget cuts, they'd said. Last in, first out. 4 years as a nurse, never late once, never a single complaint. None of it mattered. Since then, she'd sent out 53 applications. 53, not one callback. Her nursing license was still valid, but no one hired a girl without connections, without someone to vouch for her. Her grandmother needed $400 worth of medication every month. Grace had sold everything she could, her laptop, her old phone, her nice clothes, even her mother's wedding ring. The only thing she had left of her parents. They'd died in a house fire when Grace was 7. After that, Grandma Maggie had raised her, working 2 jobs at once, days at a laundromat, nights cleaning offices so her granddaughter would have food, a roof over her head, and books for school. Now she was 79, frail and sick, and Grace couldn't even afford her medicine. Guilt gnawed at her every day, every hour, every minute. The apartment was freezing. Grace wore 2 sweaters, curled up in the only thin blanket she owned. The heat had been shut off last week. She'd thought about asking the church for help, but pride stopped her every time. Stupid pride. What good was pride when you were hungry, when you were cold, when you were about to be thrown onto the street? Then came a knock at the door. Grace jolted. It was nearly midnight. Who would come here at midnight, in the middle of a storm like this? This neighborhood wasn't safe. Everyone knew that. She stood up slowly, her heart hammering. Through the peephole, she saw a tall man in an expensive black suit, soaked from head to toe. Water dripped from his dark hair. His face was sharp and cold, his eyes as keen as knives. But that wasn't what caught Grace's attention. In his arms was a little girl wrapped in a coat. Her face was flushed, her lips pale, her eyes tightly shut, and on the man's sleeve, there was blood. Every rational cell in Grace's body screamed, danger, stranger, midnight, storm, blood. But she was a nurse, and that child needed help. She recognized it instantly, high fever. A seizure could happen at any moment. Grace's hand was on the lock before her brain could catch up. She opened the door, and her life was never the same again. If this story touched your heart, please hit like to support it, and share it with anyone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next moving story. Grace opened the door, and a blast of cold wind hit her, as if it meant to knock her down. The man standing there was almost a head taller than she was, broad-shouldered, built like a wall, but his eyes, those steel-sharp eyes, were filled with panic as he looked down at the child in his arms. Please. His voice was raw. She has a high fever. My car was ambushed 6 blocks from here. The driver's hurt. My phone's broken. I saw your light. Grace didn't ask anything else. She stepped aside. Come in. Hurry. The man entered, rainwater dripping off him onto the old wooden floor. Grace's tiny apartment suddenly felt tighter than ever with his presence in it. But she didn't have time to think about that. Put her on the sofa. Grace pointed to the worn, frayed couch. She hurried into the bathroom, grabbed the only clean towel she had left, and a basin of water. When she came back, the man had already laid the little girl down. The child trembled, her breath shallow and rapid. Grace dropped to her knees beside her and placed a hand on the girl's forehead. Hot, terribly hot. 4 years as a nurse in the pediatric ward at Mount Sinai hadn't been meaningless. Grace recognized the signs right away. A high fever, around 40 degrees Celsius or more. Dry, cracked lips. Flushed skin, but cold hands and feet. If the fever didn't come down in time, the child could have a seizure. How long has it been? Grace asked, her voice steady and professional even as her heart raced. About 2 hours. At the restaurant she was fine. Then all of a sudden, The man didn't finish the sentence. His hand clenched, knuckles whitening. Grace didn't ask about the restaurant. Didn't ask about the ambush. Didn't ask about the blood on his sleeve. She focused on the child. I need to get medicine. Keep her here. She ran into the bedroom and opened the small medicine cabinet on the wall. Inside was a bottle of children's fever reducer, bought 3 months ago when she still had money. She'd meant to keep it for emergencies. For the kids in this poor neighborhood. Now it was going to save a child she'd never met. Grace returned to the living room with the medicine, a spoon, and a cup of water. She gently lifted the little girl's head. Sweetheart, can you hear me? I need you to take this medicine. It'll help you feel better. The child's eyes fluttered open. Big brown eyes, glassy with fever, looked at Grace in a hazy, unfocused way. Mom? The girl's voice was weak. Grace felt her heart tighten. She looked toward the man. He stood beside the sofa. His face turned to stone at the sound of his daughter calling for her mother. I'm not your mom, sweetheart, but I'm going to take care of you. Now take your medicine, okay? With the patience of someone who'd tended hundreds of sick children, Grace fed her one small spoonful at a time. The girl swallowed with difficulty, but she obeyed. That's it. Good girl. You're doing so well. Grace placed the damp towel on the child's forehead and began gently wiping her neck and underarms to bring the heat down. She did everything with practiced ease and precision, as if this were a normal shift at the hospital, not the middle of a stormy night in her rundown apartment. The man watched her in silence. His expression shifted little by little, from panic to attention, then to something like surprise. You're a nurse. Not a question. Yes. Grace didn't look up. Or I used to be. Used to be? I lost my job 2 months ago, Grace said shortly. She didn't want to explain more. Not right now. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Grace kept checking the temperature, changing the cool cloth, monitoring the girl's breathing. The man didn't speak, only stood there like a huge shadow, his eyes never leaving his daughter. Finally, the fever began to drop. The child's breathing grew steadier. Her cheeks were less red. Grace let out a breath of relief. She's through the worst of it. But she still needs to be watched for a few more hours. Just then, the little girl shifted. Her brown eyes opened, clearer this time. She looked around the strange room, then looked at Grace. Who are you? I'm Grace. I'm taking care of you. The child's tiny hand suddenly reached out and took Grace's hand. Warm, trusting. Your hand is warm, the girl whispered, drowsy. Warm like Mom's. Then her eyes drifted shut again, sinking into a peaceful sleep. Grace stood perfectly still, her hand still held in the child's. Her throat tightened. She didn't know where the girl's mother was. She didn't know what had happened. But that sentence, that innocent sentence, touched something deep inside her. Somewhere she'd thought had gone dry a long time ago. She lifted her head and met the man's gaze. He was looking at her, not at his daughter, at her. And in those steel-cold eyes, Grace saw something she hadn't expected at all. Tears. The man turned his face away, as if he didn't want Grace to witness that moment of weakness. He walked to the window and stared out at the sheet of rain still pouring down in a frenzy. His shoulders were rigid, one hand clenched at his side. Grace gently eased her hand out of Mia's, then pulled the thin blanket back over the child. She stood, her legs slightly numb from kneeling so long. She'll need something to eat when she wakes up, Grace said softly. And you will too. You're soaked like that, you're going to catch a cold. The man looked back at her. It was as if he'd only just remembered he was drenched from head to toe, water still dripping from his black hair onto the floor. I can lend you a towel. Grace went to the closet and took out the last clean bath towel she had. I don't have any men's clothes, but at least you can dry off. He accepted the towel and gave a short nod. Thank you. Grace went into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and took stock of what was left. A can of beans, half a loaf of bread, a packet of instant noodles. She'd planned to save the beans for tomorrow, or the day after, stretching things as long as she could. But now there was a sick child who needed food, and a man who'd walked 6 blocks through a storm, carrying his daughter in his arms. She took down the can, opened it, poured it into a pot, and lit the gas burner. At least the gas still worked. She sliced what remained of the bread into thin pieces and laid them on a plate. When she returned to the living room with a bowl of hot beans and the plate of bread, the man had dried his hair and was sitting in the chair beside the couch, his eyes never leaving his daughter. Here. Grace set the food on the table in front of him. Eat. You need your strength. He looked at the bowl of beans, then at her. And you? I've eaten, Grace said evenly. Before you got here. It was a lie. Her stomach was twisting with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, just sipped water to keep herself going, but she couldn't take the last of the food in front of a sick child and her father. The man studied her for a long moment. Those knife-sharp eyes seemed to cut straight through her lie. But he didn't say anything. He only picked up the spoon and began to eat. While he ate, Grace sat down on the floor beside the couch, continuing to watch Mia. The child slept quietly now, her breathing steady, her forehead no longer so hot. "You live here alone?" the man asked, his voice low. "Yes." He didn't add anything, but his gaze moved around the apartment. Grace knew what he was seeing. The eviction notice taped to the door. The bare kitchen cabinet she'd forgotten to close. The dead heater, even though the cold bit through everything. The threadbare couch. The walls stained with damp and mold. The whole place with nothing in it worth more than $100. "You have nothing," he said. Still not a question. Grace wasn't ashamed. She'd moved past the stage of being ashamed of poverty a long time ago. "That's right, I have nothing. But what I do have, you can use." Something shifted in the man's eyes. The hard, icy stare softened, replaced by something Grace hadn't expected. Respect. Real respect. "Why?" he asked. "You don't know who I am. You don't know what I do. You saw blood on my sleeve. Why did you still open the door?" Grace looked at Mia, at the tiny hand still clutching the corner of the blanket. "Because she needed help, that's all." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, thunder still rumbled, and the rain still fell. But this small apartment somehow felt a little warmer, even with the heater still dead. "Her name is Mia," the man said abruptly. "My daughter. Mia." "Mia," Grace repeated, a faint smile touching her mouth. "It's a beautiful name. And I'm Vincent." "Grace Mitchell." Vincent nodded. Then he asked, "You said you used to be a nurse. What happened?" Grace let out a slow breath. Maybe it was because it was so late. Maybe because she was exhausted. Maybe because this stranger, somehow, made her want to speak. "The hospital made budget cuts. I was one of the people they let go. 4 years of work, not one mistake. But I didn't have anyone to vouch for me, no connections. So I was the first one out. And now I'm looking for work. But no one's hiring." Grace lowered her eyes to her hands. "My grandmother's in a nursing home. She raised me since I was 7, after my parents died in a fire. Now she's very sick. She needs medicine. She needs care. And I can't even afford the rent." She didn't know why she was telling all of this to a stranger. Maybe because she'd carried it alone for too long. Maybe because in the darkness of a stormy night, secrets came easier. Vincent listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, he went quiet for a long time. "And you?" Grace asked, not truly expecting an answer. "What do you do?" Vincent looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "I'm in business." That was all. No explanation. No talk of the ambush. No mention of the blood on his sleeve. Grace didn't ask either. Some things were better left unknown. But deep down, she knew this man wasn't an ordinary businessman. No ordinary man had enemies who'd ambush him in the night. No ordinary man carried eyes as cold as steel and blood on his sleeve. Mia stirred on the couch, her lips moving as she called for her mother in her sleep. Vincent stood at once, went to her, and gently smoothed her hair back. "Shh, sweetheart. Daddy's here. Daddy's here." Watching that, Grace understood something. Whoever this man was, whatever he did, there was one thing she knew for certain. He loved his daughter. Loved her enough to brave rain and storm, to walk 6 blocks through the dark, searching for help. And sometimes, that was all you needed to know about a person. The first light of dawn slipped through the thin curtain and pulled Grace out of the fitful sleep she'd taken in the chair beside the couch. She'd been awake nearly all night, checking Mia's forehead every half hour. Now her neck ached. Her back was worn to the bone, but when she laid her hand on the child's brow, she let out a breath of relief. Cool. Completely cool. The fever was gone. Mia stirred, her brown eyes slowly opening. Unlike the night before, her gaze was clear and steady. She looked around the unfamiliar room, then at Grace, then at her father sitting in the chair across from her, his back against the wall, eyes closed, though Grace knew he hadn't slept. "Dad," Mia called, her voice still a little hoarse. Vincent's eyes opened at once. He stepped to the couch, dropped to one knee, and pressed his hand to his daughter's forehead. When he realized the fever had broken, that hard face finally loosened. He pulled Mia into his arms and held her tight, as if he were afraid she might vanish. "You're okay," Vincent whispered. "You're okay." Grace got up and quietly went into the kitchen, giving the two of them space. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to wake herself fully. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she was used to it by now. About an hour later, an engine rumbled outside. Not the sound of an ordinary car. Heavier, lower. Grace looked out the window and went still. A sleek black vehicle had stopped in front of the building. Not a normal car. The kind of armored SUV she'd only ever seen in movies. 2 large men in black suits got out and took positions on either side. Then a third man stepped down from the driver's seat, dark-skinned, solidly built, his sharp eyes sweeping the building as if he were measuring every possible threat. Vincent took Grace's phone, dialed a number, and spoke a few brief sentences. So he'd called someone last night when she hadn't noticed. "My people are here," Vincent said. "We have to go." Grace nodded. She'd known this moment would come. They were strangers who'd crossed paths in a storm. Now the storm had passed. They'd returned to their world, and she'd returned to her $23, the eviction notice, and the worry of Grandma Maggie. But Mia wouldn't have it. The little girl ran to Grace and wrapped her arms around Grace's legs, tiny hands clinging tight, her face pressed into Grace's knee. "I don't want to go. I want to stay with Grace." Grace knelt until she was eye level with her. "You have to go home with your dad, Mia. You need to rest until you're completely better. But I like you." Mia tipped her face up, brown eyes shining. "You smell like warm bread. Like Mom, a long time ago." Grace's heart tightened. She gathered Mia into her arms and felt the small, warm weight of her body. A child she'd met less than 10 hours ago. And yet somehow, she'd already found a corner inside Grace's heart. "I like you too," Grace whispered. "So much." Vincent stood watching, his face unreadable, but his eyes said everything. Then he stepped forward and gently eased Mia out of Grace's arms. "Come on, sweetheart. We have to go." He lifted Mia, but before he walked out the door, he turned back to Grace. With one hand, he pulled a thick stack of cash and a business card from his pocket and pressed them into her palm. "This is $3,000, Vincent said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And my phone number. If you need anything at all, call me." Grace looked down at the money in her hand, then up at him. "I can't take—" "You saved my daughter," Vincent cut in. "You gave us shelter, food, care, when you had nothing. This isn't charity. This is a debt I owe you." She wanted to refuse. Pride screamed in her head, telling her she wasn't a beggar, telling her she hadn't helped them for money. But then she thought of Grandma Maggie, thought of the $15,000 bill, thought of the $400 a month for medicine, thought of the eviction notice on the door. She swallowed her pride and nodded. "Thank you." Vincent didn't say anything else. He carried Mia out, down the stairs. The dark-skinned man, the one Vincent called Marcus, opened the car door. Before she climbed inside, Mia turned back and waved. "Goodbye, Grace. I'll miss you." Grace waved back, forcing a smile even as her throat tightened. Then the door shut. The engine started. The armored vehicle rolled away, disappearing at the end of the street. Grace stood at the window, watching until there was nothing left to see but puddles gathered from last night's storm. The apartment suddenly felt emptier than ever, quieter, colder. She looked down at the business card in her hand. No name, no title, no address. Just a string of digits printed in black ink on white. Who was that man? And why did she have the feeling that what happened last night wasn't the last time they'd meet? That very morning, Grace went to see the landlord. He was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and a look of contempt that never seemed to leave his face when he glanced at her. But when Grace set $900 in rent plus $250 in late fees on his desk, that look changed. He counted the money, gave a curt nod, and tore the eviction notice in front of her. Grace walked out of the building management office feeling as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted off her chest. For the first time in 2 months, she didn't have to worry about being thrown out onto the street. She went straight to the pharmacy and bought a full month of Maggie's medicine. $400. Then she stopped at the grocery store and bought real food. Not instant noodles or canned beans, but chicken, green vegetables, fruit, milk, eggs, fresh bread, the kind of things she hadn't eaten in 2 months. As she packed everything into the refrigerator, she almost cried. That afternoon, Grace went to the nursing home to see Maggie. Maggie sat in her wheelchair by the window, hair white as snow, face lined with wrinkles, but her eyes still bright and sharp. When she saw Grace, she smiled, a smile that made every tired thing inside Grace dissolve. "There's my granddaughter." Maggie held out her hand, and Grace took it, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "Grandma, I have something I need to tell you." And Grace told her everything. About the stormy night, about the man knocking at midnight, about little Mia with a burning fever, about the last can of beans, about the $3,000 and the nameless business card. Maggie listened without interrupting, her aged eyes holding a glint Grace couldn't read. When Grace finished, Maggie was quiet for a long time. Then she squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "You did the right thing," she said, slow but firm. "You helped a child who needed help. It doesn't matter who her father is, or what he does. That child is innocent, and you saved her." "But Grandma, I don't know who he is. There was blood on his sleeve. Someone ambushed him. He's not normal." Maggie smiled, the gentle, forgiving smile of someone who'd lived nearly 80 years. "I've lived long enough to know the world isn't only black and white, sweetheart. There are people who do bad things and still love their family. There are people who look decent and are rotten inside. You looked into that man's eyes when he held his daughter. What did you see?" Grace thought back. Thought of the moment Vincent held Mia after the fever broke. Thought of the tears in his eyes when the child whispered, "Mom." Thought of the way he stroked her hair, his voice soft as he murmured, "Daddy's here." "I saw a father who loves his child," she whispered. "Then you already have your answer." Maggie patted her hand. "Kindness is always repaid, sweetheart. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday." Grace stayed with Maggie until evening, then went home. The apartment now had food in the fridge and money in her pocket, but it still felt empty. She sat on the couch, where Mia had lain the night before, and took out the business card to look at it. Just a string of digits. No name, no address, nothing at all. Who was that man? Grace took out her old phone, connected to the building's weak Wi-Fi, and typed into the search bar, Vincent Moretti, New York. The results appeared almost instantly. But there were few clear photos, mostly grainy, long-distance shots, and cryptic headlines. Vincent Moretti, the ghost, the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast of the United States, the head of the Moretti family, one of the 5 major mafia families in New York, suspected in dozens of murders but never convicted, because no one dared testify against him. She scrolled, her heart hammering. One article showed Vincent in a black suit, his face like ice, standing outside a courthouse. Another wrote about the assassination of his wife, Isabella Moretti, 2 years earlier. She'd been shot to death right in front of their daughter. The killer was never found, but rumors said it was the work of a rival gang. Grace let the phone fall from her hand, her fingers shaking. The man from last night. The man who'd eaten her last can of beans. The man who'd left $3,000 on the promise. "Call me if you need anything." He was the most infamous mafia boss in New York, and she'd opened her door to him. A week passed like torture. Grace couldn't stop thinking about what she'd read. Every night she dreamed of Vincent's icy stare, of the blood on his sleeve, of the articles with their terrifying headlines. She hid the business card at the bottom of a drawer, as if not seeing it could make everything less real. But life didn't give her much time to be afraid. $3,000 sounded like a lot, but after paying the rent, buying Maggie's medicine, buying food, and covering part of the overdue utility bills, Grace had less than $500 left, and she still couldn't find a job. Every day she left home early, moving from one hospital to another, from one clinic to the next, from one nursing home to another health center. 53 applications became 67. Still not a single callback. The only pair of shoes she owned had worn down at the heel, and her feet were blistered from walking too much. On Friday afternoon, when she finally got home after a long day of disappointment, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. Grace almost didn't answer, assuming it was a scam or an advertisement, but something pushed her to pick up. "Miss Mitchell?" A man's voice, deep and commanding, came through the line. She recognized it at once. Marcus, the dark-skinned man who'd driven the sleek vehicle that day. "Yes, I'm here. Mr. Moretti wants to see you. There's a job opportunity he thinks you'll be interested in." Grace's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She wanted to say no, wanted to hang up immediately. She knew who Vincent was now. She knew how dangerous he was. Just getting involved with him could change her life in ways she didn't want. But then she looked around her apartment. The refrigerator was almost empty again. Next month's rent had nowhere to come from. Maggie still needed her medicine, and Grace was still unemployed. "Where?" she heard herself ask. "A car will pick you up in an hour." Exactly an hour later, a glossy black car stopped in front of the building, not armored like the one before, but still so luxurious the whole poor block turned to stare. Grace got in, where Marcus was waiting in the driver's seat. He didn't speak during the drive. He only steered through the familiar streets of Brooklyn, then crossed the bridge into Manhattan. Grace watched the world change beyond the glass, from old gray buildings to towering skyscrapers shimmering with light, 2 worlds that had nothing to do with each other. The car stopped in front of an Italian restaurant on the Upper East Side, an oak sign with gold lettering. There were no customers inside, even though it was dinner time. The doors were closed, but when Marcus led her up, a waiter opened them at once. "Mr. Moretti is waiting for you." Grace stepped inside. The restaurant was spacious and lavish, with white tablecloths, candlelight flickering, and paintings hanging on the walls, but it was all empty. Only one person sat at the last table, by a window that looked out toward the park. Vincent Moretti. He was nothing like the man who'd been drenched and panicked in the storm. Vincent sat in a charcoal gray three-piece suit, flawless from collar to cufflinks. His black hair was neatly combed. His face was sharp and cold. Everything about him radiated power, danger, and something that made Grace want to turn around and run. But she didn't run. She walked to the table, even though her knees trembled a little. Vincent stood as she approached. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming." "You wanted to see me," Grace said, doing her best to keep her voice steady. "About what job?" Vincent gestured for her to sit. A waiter appeared as if from nowhere, poured water for both of them, then vanished. Vincent studied her for a long moment, those knife-sharp eyes weighing her, measuring her. "Mia," he said at last. "She needs someone to care for her." Grace waited. Since her mother died 2 years ago, Mia hasn't spoken a word to anyone outside of a few broken whispers to me. Not to nannies, not to tutors, not to therapists. 7 people have tried to take care of her. 7. Every one of them either quit or was dismissed because they couldn't reach her. Vincent paused, and for the first time Grace saw weariness in his eyes. "But that night in your apartment," Mia talked. "She held your hand. She said your hand was warm like her mother's. That was the first time she mentioned her mother without crying in 2 years. Grace didn't know what to say. "I want you to take care of Mia," Vincent said plainly. "Be her private caregiver. Live with us." Grace sat there, unable to speak for several seconds. A private nanny, living with them. She'd imagined a dozen possibilities on the ride here, but not one of them looked like this. "The salary is $8,000 a month," Vincent went on, his tone as calm as if he were talking about the weather. "Room and board included. You'll have your own room in my house. Full health insurance for you, and for your grandmother as well. I did some checking. Maggie is at Sunrise Nursing Home, isn't she? I can move her to a better facility, with specialists on call, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. $8,000 a month. Insurance for Maggie, too. A better place." The numbers and the offer spun through Grace's mind like a storm. It was more than 3 times what she'd made as a nurse before. It was an answer to every financial problem crushing her shoulders. But she wasn't a fool. "I know who you are," Grace said, her voice trembling slightly, though she forced it steady. "I looked you up. Vincent Moretti, the ghost, the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast." Vincent didn't look surprised. He took a sip of wine, set the glass down, and met her gaze without blinking. "You're smart. I expected that. And you still want me to work for you. After I know what you've done?" "You know what the papers say," Vincent replied. "The papers say many things. Some true, some false, some exaggerated." He paused, eyes locked on hers. "But I won't lie to you. I am what they say. I've done things ordinary people would call crimes. I have lived, and still live, in a world you were never meant to know." Grace felt the blood in her veins turn cold. At least he was honest. "But I'm also a father," Vincent continued, and for the first time his voice softened. "A father with a 5-year-old daughter who's lost her mother. A child who hasn't smiled, hasn't spoken, hasn't let anyone touch her for 2 years. The job I'm offering you has nothing to do with my business. You'll only care for Mia. That's all." Grace said nothing, but she was listening. 7 nannies, Vincent said. 7 people have come and gone in 2 years. The first quit after 3 days because Mia wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, only sat and stared out the window waiting for her mother to come back. The second lasted 2 weeks, then resigned because she couldn't bear listening to Mia cry all night calling for her mother. The third, the fourth, the 5th, they were afraid. Afraid of me. Afraid of what they'd heard about the Moretti family. They looked at Mia and saw the daughter of a criminal, not a child in pain. He stopped, and Grace saw something in his eyes. Not coldness, not danger, but grief. The grief of a father who couldn't fix what mattered most. "And then that night, in your apartment, I saw what I haven't seen in 2 years. Vincent went on. "Mia held your hand. Mia spoke to you. The next morning, when we got home, she found her voice just to ask me when she'd get to see Grace again. That was the first time she'd asked about anyone since her mother died." His voice roughened. "You're the only person who's made her smile, Miss Mitchell. The only one." Grace remembered the tiny hand closing around hers, Remembered the faint voice saying, "Your hand is warm like Mom's." Remembered the brown eyes shining with trust. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Vincent said. "I'm not asking you to like me. I'm only asking you to help my daughter, give her a chance to be happy again." Grace looked down at her hands that had cared for hundreds of patients, hands that a 5-year-old had called warm like a mother's. "I need time to think," she said at last. Vincent nodded, not pressing. "You have 3 days. After that, whatever you decide, I'll respect it." He reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. "This has my address and Marcus's contact information. If you agree, call him." Grace picked up the envelope and stood. She started to leave, then turned back. "Why me?" she asked. "You have money. You can hire anyone. The best specialists. Why a unemployed nurse in a shabby apartment?" Vincent looked at her, and for the first time she saw the faintest smile touch his mouth. Not a cold smile. A real one. "Because that night you had $23 and 1 can of beans. And you still opened the door to a stranger. You still gave us everything you had," he said. "Money can buy experts. It can't buy that kind of kindness." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay on her bed staring up at the stained ceiling, her mind spinning with opposite thoughts. On one side was the image of Vincent Moretti in his flawless suit, the cold gaze of the most powerful Mafia boss in New York. On the other was the image of a man drenched in a storm, eyes rimmed red as he held his daughter, his voice trembling as he said, "Daddy's here." The two images kept weaving into each other, until she couldn't decide anything at all. The next morning, Grace went to the nursing home earlier than usual. Maggie was sitting by the window as always, holding an old book she'd read and reread dozens of times. When she saw her granddaughter walk in with a face full of worry, she set the book down and opened her arms wide. "What is it, my love?" Grace pulled up a chair beside her and told her everything. About the meeting at the restaurant, about the offer of $8,000 a month, about the insurance, about moving Maggie to a better facility, and about the truth that Vincent Moretti was a Mafia boss, a man all of New York feared. Maggie listened in silence, without interrupting, without looking shocked or afraid. When Grace finished, Maggie stayed quiet for a long time. Her aged eyes turned toward the window where the morning sun slanted through the trees. "Grandma," Grace said, her voice tangled with conflict, "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to take the job because I need the money, because you need better care, because that little girl Mia, she needs me. But another part of me is scared. He's a criminal, Grandma. He's done terrible things." Maggie turned back to her granddaughter and took her hand in those wrinkled fingers that were still warm. "Sweetheart, I've lived nearly 80 years in this world. I've seen all kinds of people. There are men who wear a preacher's robe and do vile things. There are people called criminals who have saved dozens of lives." She paused, her voice slow. "A person isn't only black or white, my love. This world is more complicated than what the papers write." But he admitted it, Grandma. He said he's exactly what the papers say. "And he also said he's a father, didn't he?" Maggie asked. "A father with a little girl who lost her mother, who hasn't spoken or smiled for 2 years. A father desperate enough to come to a poor girl in Brooklyn because she's the only one who made his child smile." Grace said nothing. "You told me that little girl said your hand was warm like her mother's," Maggie continued gently. "Do you know what that means? A child who lost her mother, who's refused every kind of closeness for 2 years, but opened her heart to you the very first time. That isn't an accident, sweetheart. That's fate." Grace remembered Mia's shining brown eyes, remembered the tiny hand gripping hers, remembered the weak voice, so trusting. "That child needs you," Maggie said, firm now. "That's the most important thing. Not the money, not the insurance, not the fancy room, but a 5-year-old child waiting for you to help her find her smile again. Can you really turn away?" Grace bowed her head, tears spilling down. She knew the answer. She'd known it since the moment Mia clung to her that morning and wouldn't let go. "Aren't you afraid?" she asked. "Afraid I'll be in danger living in a Mafia boss's house?" Maggie smiled, tender and forgiving. "Of course I'm afraid, but I believe in you. You're the strongest child I've ever known. You'll know how to protect yourself. And who knows," she added with a wink, "maybe you'll even change that Mafia boss." Grace laughed through her tears. She hugged Maggie tight, breathing in the familiar scent of the woman who'd raised her for 21 years. That afternoon, Grace picked up her phone and dialed Marcus's number. "I agree," she said when he answered. "When do I start?" 3 days later, the glossy black car pulled up in front of Grace's old building for the last time. She'd cleaned the apartment, packed what was left into a small suitcase and a handbag. Not much. Her entire life fit neatly into those two things. She terminated the lease, returned the keys to the heavyset landlord, and said goodbye to the rundown place that had sheltered her for 3 years. No nostalgia, only relief. Marcus was waiting beside the car. He nodded in greeting when she stepped out. He took the suitcase from her hand, opened the door for her, then slid into the driver's seat. During the drive, he didn't talk much, only occasionally studying her in the rearview mirror with an unreadable look. They left Brooklyn, crossed the bridge, cut through Manhattan, and headed east. The scenery changed little by little, from crowded, cramped neighborhoods to broader roads lined with lush green trees, from old gray buildings to grand estates hidden behind high fences and solid iron gates. After nearly an hour, the car stopped before an enormous black iron gate. Marcus pressed a button on the console, and the gate began to swing open. They rolled down a white gravel drive that curved between rows of ancient oak trees, and then Grace saw it, the Moretti estate. She'd imagined many things, but nothing prepared her for this. A 3-story mansion rose like a castle, with white stone columns, intricate wrought iron balconies, and dozens of tall windows catching the late afternoon sun. Around it stretched a vast garden, with a sweep of green lawn, a marble fountain, and rose bushes in full bloom, lavish, radiant, and yet strangely cold. Grace noticed men in black suits positioned everywhere, at the gate, at the corners of the grounds, on the second-floor balcony. Their eyes tracked the car as it passed, sharp and alert. Security cameras were mounted on every angle, infrared lights, electronic fencing. This wasn't a home, it was a fortress. The car stopped at the front entrance. Marcus got out, opened the door for her, and led her inside. The main hall was the size of an auditorium, with a soaring ceiling, a massive crystal chandelier, and twin staircases curving up to the second floor. Everything was marble, oak, and gold, expensive, perfect, and empty. Before you start, Marcus stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. There are a few rules you need to remember. Grace nodded, waiting. You work for Mia, not for Mr. Moretti. Your job is to care for the child, nothing else, Marcus said slowly, as if he wanted her to understand every word. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. Don't go where you're not allowed. The basement, Mr. Moretti's office in the East Wing and the guest house out back are off limits. If you see or hear something, you didn't see it, and you didn't hear it. Understood? Understood, Grace said, her throat a little dry. Marcus led her up to the second floor, along a long corridor lined with oil paintings and fresh flower arrangements. He stopped at an oak door and pushed it open. Your room. Grace stepped in and went still. The room was 3 times the size of her old apartment. A king-sized bed with white silk sheets, a walnut wardrobe, a vanity with a large mirror, a window overlooking the rose garden, a private bathroom with a marble tub and gold-plated shower fixtures. This was her room, for an unemployed nurse from Brooklyn. She barely had time to collect herself before the sound of running footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door flew open, and a small whirlwind burst into the room. Grace. Mia launched herself at her, tiny arms wrapping tight around Grace's waist. The child looked up, brown eyes bright, her mouth split in a wide grin. Daddy said you'd stay with me. Is it true? Are you going to be here forever? Grace knelt until she was at eye level. Looking into those shining eyes, that radiant smile, she felt her fear and worry start to dissolve. This was why she was here. Not the money, not the lavish room, but this child who looked at her as if she were the whole world. I'm going to be here with you, Grace said, pulling Mia into her arms. I promise. And in that moment, her heart melted completely. 2 weeks passed like a dream Grace never saw coming. Each morning she woke in the vast room, watched sunlight spill through the curtains, and needed a few seconds to remember where she was. No more rundown apartment with damp-stained walls. No more mice skittering in the night. No more bone-cutting cold because the heat had been shut off. But what made her happiest wasn't the luxury of the room, or the certainty of full meals. It was Mia's laughter. Every day, Grace and Mia were almost never apart. They ate breakfast together in the large dining room. They played in the rose garden. They read in the library. They drew in the playroom filled with toys Mia had never touched. The little girl followed Grace like a shadow, trailed her everywhere, held her hand whenever they walked, and stayed pressed close whenever she could. Vincent was often away, leaving early and coming home late. But Grace noticed how he would stop at the threshold of the playroom, standing there to watch his daughter from a distance. He didn't step inside. He didn't speak. He only stood there, watching Mia laugh with Grace, and in those steel-sharp eyes there was something soft she couldn't name. On the 10th night, everything changed. Grace was asleep in her room when a scream of sobbing came from Mia's bedroom. She sprang up like a coil, ran down the hallway, and flung the door open. Mia was sitting upright in bed, drenched in sweat, both hands clutching her head, crying hard. "Mia!" Grace rushed to the bedside and gathered her into her arms. I'm here. You're safe." Mia shook in her embrace, crying the way a child cries when she's held too much inside for too long. Grace held her tighter, rubbing her back, murmuring comfort. It took nearly 10 minutes before the cries faded into broken hiccups. "I dreamed about Mom," Mia whispered, her voice rough. "I dreamed she got shot." Grace's heart tightened. She knew Isabella Moretti had been assassinated 2 years ago, but she hadn't known Mia had seen it. "I was there," Mia went on, eyes squeezed shut, tears still running. "Mom was holding my hand, taking me to school. Then a car came. There was a loud bang. Mom fell down. There was so much blood. Mom told me to run, but I couldn't run. I was so scared." Grace felt tears spill down her own face. She held Mia tighter, as if she could shield her from every brutal memory. "I don't want Daddy to get shot too," Mia whispered. "I don't want to lose Daddy like I lost Mom. I don't want to lose you either, Grace." "I'm not going anywhere," Grace said, her voice thick. "I'm here with you. I promise." She held Mia through the rest of the night, sitting on the bed, letting the child sleep in her arms. When dawn finally arrived, Grace looked down at the innocent face, sleeping peacefully, and she understood. This child hadn't only lost her mother. She'd lost her childhood. She'd lost the feeling of safety. She'd lost the ability to trust anyone. And somehow, she'd chosen to trust Grace. In the days that followed, Mia began to open up even more. She talked about her mother, about the way her mother used to read to her before bedtime, about afternoons when her mother took her out for ice cream, about the scent of perfume she still remembered. She talked about the nightmares that came night after night, about the fear that rose when she heard a loud sound, about how she was afraid to go outside because bad people might come and take her the way they'd taken her mother. Grace listened to all of it, without interrupting, without judgment. She only held Mia, smoothed her hair, and said what Mia needed to hear, that she was loved, that she was safe, that Grace would always be here. One afternoon, Mia sat drawing in the playroom. Grace sat beside her, reading. When the child finished, she lifted the picture, eyes bright. "This is my family." Grace looked at the drawing. 3 figures holding hands. A tall man with dark hair, a little girl with 2 braids, and a blonde woman. "This is Daddy," Mia said, pointing to the first. "This is me, and this is Grace." Grace felt her throat tighten. "And what about your mom?" "Mom is in the sky," Mia said, calm in a way that hurt. "She's watching me from up there, but she can't come back. So I have Grace instead." Grace didn't know what to say. She only pulled Mia into her arms, tears sliding down her cheeks. Neither of them noticed Vincent standing in the doorway. He'd been there for some time, watching his daughter draw, listening to her say, "My family." And when his gaze fell on the picture, on the 3 figures holding hands, on the blonde woman his daughter called family, those steel, cold eyes blurred. Vincent Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in New York, stood in the shadows, and he cried. A week after the night Mia drew that family picture, Grace had fully found her rhythm within the Moretti estate. She learned what time Mia liked to eat breakfast, what kind of books the child loved, which song helped her drift off to sleep. She also learned the forbidden zones in this house, the places Marcus had warned her never to go near. She followed every rule. She didn't ask what she shouldn't ask. She didn't look at what she shouldn't look, until that night. Grace woke around midnight, thirsty. She went downstairs to the kitchen, moving through the pitch-dark hallway. But as she passed the east wing, where Vincent's office was, she heard voices coming from a door left slightly ajar. Vincent's voice, but not the voice she knew. Not the gentle voice he used with Mia. Not the controlled, even tone he used with Grace. This was a voice like ice, sharp as a blade, stripped of feeling. "I'm giving you a chance. One chance only, to explain why you sold information about the Moretti family to Ricci." Another man's voice, trembling, pleading. "Mr. Moretti, please. I have a family. I have small children. I have a child too." Vincent's voice stayed cold. "My daughter nearly died because of the ambush you tipped them off about. Do you think I'm going to forgive that?" The begging grew more desperate. Then came a heavy thud, a groan, the sound of Vincent saying something to Marcus. Grace couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. She understood. She backed away, heart pounding, one hand clamped over her mouth to keep from making a sound. She ran to her room, locked the door, and curled up on the bed, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. This was Vincent Moretti. This was the real him. Not the man who'd stood crying over his daughter's drawing. Not the gentle father she'd begun to trust, but a mafia boss. The ghost. A killer. Grace wanted to run, to pack her things immediately, call a taxi, go back to Brooklyn, and forget all of it. She didn't belong in this world. She couldn't live in the house of a murderer. But then she thought of Mia, of those shining brown eyes, of the tiny hand gripping hers each night, of the words, "Grace is my family." If she left, what would happen to that child? Abandoned again, losing the one person she trusted, all over again. Grace sat there, torn between fear and love, until the sky began to pale with morning. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. The sound of Mia's door opening. Vincent's voice. Grace cracked her own door and looked out. Vincent was sitting on Mia's bed, the child curled against him. And he was reading aloud, the Princess and the Dragon book Mia loved most. His voice was gentle, warm, nothing like the coldness from a few hours earlier. "Daddy," Mia whispered, "do you love me?" "I love you more than anything in this world," Vincent replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You won't go away, will you? Like Mommy." "I'm not going anywhere. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not ever," Vincent's voice caught. "I promise you." Grace stood there, watching a man who'd just handled a traitor hold his daughter in his arms, lull her towards sleep with that deep, warm voice. And she realized something. Vincent Moretti was two men. He was a devil to his enemies, to anyone who threatened his family. Cold, ruthless, without mercy. But he was also an angel to his daughter, to the people he loved. Gentle, warm, willing to do anything to protect them. The world wasn't only black and white. Maggie had been right. A person couldn't be defined by only one face. Vincent did terrible things, but he did them for his reasons. To protect his daughter, to protect his family, to make sure no one could ever hurt the people he loved. Grace didn't know if that justified what he did. She wasn't a judge. But she knew one thing. She wasn't afraid of Vincent the way she'd been before. She was afraid of the world he lived in, afraid of his enemies, afraid of violence and blood. But she wasn't afraid of Vincent. Not of the man sitting there, holding his daughter to sleep, eyes turned toward the window with a look full of love. Grace went back to her room, closed the door, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she fell into a truly deep sleep. 2 months passed like a dream. Grace's life had changed completely in ways she never could have imagined. Each morning she woke without worrying about rent, overdue bills, or where the next meal would come from. Instead, she woke to Mia's laughter, to the rich scent of coffee drifting up from the kitchen, to sunlight pouring through the windows of her wide-open bedroom. And Maggie. Vincent had kept his promise. 1 week after Grace officially started the job, Maggie was moved from the shabby Sunrise nursing home to a private medical facility on Long Island, only a 20-minute drive from the Moretti estate. There, she had a spacious private room with windows overlooking a flower garden. Specialists monitored her around the clock. Nurses were always on duty. Every modern piece of medical equipment was within reach. The first time Grace visited her in the new place, Maggie cried. Not from sadness, from happiness. "You don't owe anyone anything, remember that," Maggie said, holding Grace's hand tight. "You deserve this. You and your kindness." Grace visited her twice a week, often bringing Mia along. Mia called Maggie Grandma and spent hours listening to stories from long ago. Watching them together, old and young, laughing and talking, Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest that she couldn't explain. But the biggest change wasn't the luxurious room or Maggie's medical care. It was dinner. Before, Vincent was rarely home. He left early and came back late, and Grace usually only caught glimpses of him in a hallway or on the stairs. But about a month earlier, things began to shift. Vincent started coming home sooner. He began appearing at the dinner table. He began sitting with Grace and Mia, eating family meals the chef prepared. At first, those dinners were stiff. Vincent sat quietly, occasionally asking Mia about school, about what she'd done that day. Grace sat across from him, not knowing what to say, feeling like an intruder in a private space that belonged to a father and his child. But then Mia changed everything. She started chattering about what she and Grace did together, about the pictures they drew, about the books they read, about the games they played in the garden. And little by little, Vincent began to ask Grace questions. About her work, about Maggie, about her life before she came here. One evening, after Mia had gone upstairs to bed, Grace was sitting in the living room reading when Vincent walked in. He held 2 glasses of wine and offered one to her. "You don't have to sit alone," he said, taking the chair across from her. They sat there, drinking in silence for a long time. Then Vincent began to talk about Isabella, about how they'd met when they were young, about their wedding, about the day Mia was born, about how Isabella had been the light of his life, the only person who could make him truly smile. "When she died," Vincent said, his voice low and full of pain, "I thought I would die with her. I wanted to die with her. I couldn't see any reason to keep living." Grace listened, not interrupting. "But then Mia looked at me," Vincent continued. "She looked at me with Isabella's eyes and asked, 'Daddy, is Mom coming back?' And I realized I couldn't die. I couldn't leave her alone. Mia needed me. So I kept living. For her." Grace set her glass down. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "When my parents died in the fire, I was 7. I don't remember much about that night. Just the flames, and the screaming, and the feeling of someone pulling me outside." She paused, swallowing hard. "Maggie saved me. She ran into a burning house to drag me out. She was badly burned and spent 3 months in the hospital. But she lived, and she raised me." Vincent looked at her, and something shifted in his gaze. Not the coldness she'd known at first, but empathy, understanding. "You're strong," he said. "Stronger than you think. My grandmother taught me we're strong because of the people we love," Grace replied. "She lived for me. I live for her. And you live for Mia." They looked at each other, and in that moment, Grace realized they weren't boss and employee anymore. Not a mafia boss and a broke nurse. They were 2 people who'd lost, who'd suffered, who'd clawed their way back from ashes for the ones they loved. They were 2 kindred souls. And that was even more frightening than living in the house of a mafia boss. Grace knew Mia's birthday was coming when she happened to see the date on the child's medical file. 10 days away. She asked Marcus about previous years, and the answer made her heart ache. Since Isabella died, Mia's birthday had been a store-bought cake, a few expensive gifts, and silence. No balloons, no party, no laughter. Vincent didn't know how to throw a birthday for his daughter, and Mia never asked for anything. Grace decided she was going to change that. She spent the entire week preparing in secret. She ordered pink balloons and pink streamers, Mia's favorite color. She asked the chef to teach her how to make a cake, because she wanted to do it herself, not buy one. She stayed up late drawing a birthday card, folding tiny paper stars to scatter across the room. She even asked Marcus to quietly bring back the stuffed animals Mia had mentioned when the 2 of them passed a toy store. On the morning of the birthday, Grace woke at 4 a.m. She went down to the kitchen and baked a cake, a strawberry cake, with smooth white frosting and 6 pink candles. Not as perfect as something from a bakery, but made with her whole heart. Then she went up to the playroom, where Vincent had given permission for a small celebration, and began decorating. Balloons floated along the ceiling. Tinsel wrapped the windows. Paper stars covered the floor. A large banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Mia," which Grace had stayed up all night to finish. When Mia woke, and Grace led her to the playroom, the child froze in the doorway. Brown eyes wide, mouth open, unable to speak. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Grace said, smiling brightly. Mia still stood there, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. And then, suddenly, she burst into tears. Grace panicked and rushed to her. "What is it? You don't like it. I'm sorry if I..." But Mia threw her arms around her and sobbed into her. "I love it. I love it so much. This is the first time I've felt happy on my birthday since Mom died." Grace held her tight, tears sliding down her own cheeks. She looked up and saw Vincent standing in the doorway. He'd been there for who knew how long, watching his daughter cry in Grace's arms. And on the face that was usually cold and unreadable, Grace saw something she'd never seen before. Tears. They spent the whole day together, the 3 of them, eating cake, opening gifts, playing games. Mia laughed nonstop, bright laughter filling the room, filling the house that had once been as silent as a grave. Vincent laughed too. A real laugh Grace was hearing for the first time. He looked younger when he laughed, less frightening, less icy, like an ordinary father playing with his child. That night, after Mia fell asleep in her father's arms, Grace stepped out onto the balcony to breathe the cool air. She stood there looking down at the rose garden under moonlight and felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Footsteps behind her. She turned. Vincent. He walked out onto the balcony and stopped beside her. They were quiet for a while, both looking out into the still garden. "Thank you," Vincent said, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you for what you did today." Thank you for bringing life back into this house." "I only threw a small party," Grace replied. "No." Vincent turned to her. "You did more than that. You gave Mia something I couldn't give her. Joy, laughter, the feeling of being loved." He paused. "For 2 years, I've tried. But I don't know how. I only know how to protect her, to give her everything material. But I don't know how to make her happy. Not until you came." Grace didn't know what to say. Her heart began to beat faster. Vincent reached out and touched her hand. His hand was warm and strong, his fingers sliding gently between hers. Grace held her breath, afraid to move. "Grace," Vincent whispered, his voice going rough. He turned fully toward her, one hand still holding hers, the other rising to cup her cheek. Those knife-sharp eyes were strangely soft now, looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He tilted his head, closer, closer still. Grace felt his warm breath against her lips. Her heart hammered. She closed her eyes. The phone rang. Vincent stopped, his mouth only millimeters from hers. The phone kept ringing. Marcus's voice came through when Vincent reluctantly answered, tense, saying something about urgent and Ricci. Vincent ended the call, his face returning to its usual cold control. But when he looked at Grace, his eyes still held something that hadn't faded. "I have to go," he said, regret thick in his voice. "Something needs to be handled." Then he walked away, disappearing into the dark. Grace stood alone on the balcony, her hand still warm where Vincent had held it. Her heart was still racing. Her lips still carried the ghost of his breath. She was falling in love with a Mafia boss, and that was more terrifying than anything she'd ever lived through. In the days after the birthday night, everything between Grace and Vincent turned strange. They still saw each other at every dinner, still talked, still played with Mia together. But something had shifted. The looks lasted longer than they used to. Accidental brushes of hands made them both startle. There were silences heavy with meaning that neither of them dared to break. Grace tried not to think about that night on the balcony, about Vincent's warm breath against her lips, about the moment when, if the phone hadn't rung, they might have kissed. She told herself it had only been a brief impulse, that Vincent was her employer and she was his employee, that there was nothing between them and there shouldn't be anything. But her heart wouldn't listen. What she didn't know was that while she was wrestling with her own feelings, someone else was watching. Anthony Ricci, the rival Mafia boss of the Moretti family, the man who'd ordered Isabella's assassination 2 years ago, had learned about her existence. He had someone on the inside, eyes and ears everywhere, and he knew that Vincent Moretti, the man called the Ghost, had a new weakness. A blonde girl. A broke nurse from Brooklyn. And more importantly, the woman taking care of his daughter. That afternoon, the weather was unusually beautiful. Mia begged Grace to take her for ice cream at their usual shop, about a 15-minute drive from the estate. Grace checked with Marcus, and he agreed on the condition that 2 guards would follow in a second vehicle. Grace didn't think much of it. She'd lived here for nearly 3 months, grown used to being accompanied by security, begun to feel safe inside this world. They got into the car. Mia sat in the back seat, singing a little song Grace had taught her. The black SUV glided along the quiet Long Island roads, late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Everything felt so peaceful that Grace almost forgot she was living in a Mafia world, until the car was blocked. A black van shot out from an alley without warning, cutting across the road. Grace's driver slammed the brakes. The SUV slewed sideways, tires shrieking on the pavement. Grace lurched forward, and instinctively she twisted around to shield Mia. Then the doors flew open. 3 men dressed in black, faces covered, rushed toward them. Grace's driver was yanked out, the sound of fists and kicks cracking through the air. Another man raised a gun and aimed at the rear door. "Get out of the car," he roared. "Give me the kid." Grace didn't think. She wrapped Mia in her arms, covered her with her own body. Her heart pounded wildly, fear so sharp she could barely breathe. But she didn't let go. "No," she screamed. "Don't touch her. Help. Somebody help." Mia shrieked, shaking like a leaf. "Grace, Grace, I'm scared." The masked man reached in to drag Grace out. He grabbed her hair and yanked hard. Pain flashed so bright she nearly blacked out, but she still didn't loosen her hold on Mia. She bit his hand, bit down with everything she had. He jerked back, swearing. Then he raised the gun, aiming straight at her head. At that exact moment, a shot rang out. Not from the masked man. From behind. The security vehicle had arrived. Marcus leapt out, gun in hand, and fired with deadly precision into the shoulder of the man threatening Grace. 2 other guards rushed in and took down the remaining attackers. Shouts. Gunfire. An engine screaming. The black van sped away, leaving wounded men on the road. In those few seconds of chaos, Grace did nothing but hold Mia tight, shielding her from everything. She didn't let go, even as her whole body shook so hard she could barely stay upright. When silence finally returned, Marcus ran to the SUV. "Are you all right? Is Mia all right?" Grace couldn't speak. She only nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mia sobbed in her arms, the sound tearing at Grace's heart. "I'm scared. I'm so scared. Like when Mom got—" The child couldn't finish, but Grace understood. The memory of the day Isabella was shot had come back, alive and brutal. Grace held her tighter and kissed the top of her head. "I'm here. I'm here with you. No one's going to hurt you. I promise." But inside Grace, fear was spreading fast. This world wasn't safe, and she and Mia had become a target. Marcus drove them back to the estate immediately. The whole way, Grace held Mia in her arms and didn't let go for even a second. The child had stopped crying, but she was still trembling, eyes squeezed shut, her face pressed into Grace's chest. Grace stroked her hair and whispered comfort, even though she herself was still in shock. Her hands still shook, her heart still hammered, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the barrel of a gun pointed straight at her head. When the car stopped in front of the mansion, Vincent was already there. He stood on the front steps, rigid as stone. His face was cold as ice, his eyes sharp enough to cut the air. Grace had never seen him like this. Not his usual cool control. This was fury boiling underneath, ready to explode. The car door opened. Vincent surged forward, arms reaching for Mia. The moment the child saw her father, she broke into tears again and lunged into his embrace. "Daddy, Daddy, I was so scared." Vincent crushed his daughter to him, holding her so tight it was as if he wanted to bury her inside his chest. He didn't speak. He only held her, eyes shut hard, jaw clenched. Grace saw his shoulders tremble. She didn't know if it was rage or terror at the thought of losing his child a second time. After a moment, Vincent handed Mia to the housekeeper, telling her to take the child upstairs to rest. Then he turned to Grace. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, as if he were forcing something back. "I'm fine," Grace said, trying to keep her voice steady, even though her hands were still shaking beyond her control. Vincent stepped closer. His gaze swept over her from head to toe, taking in every detail. Then he saw the bruise on her wrist where the masked man had grabbed her, saw strands of hair torn loose, still clinging to her shoulder, saw the nail marks scratched along her forearm. Vincent's eyes darkened. "Did anyone touch you?" The question came out deadly, terrifying. Grace started to say no, but she knew lying to Vincent was pointless. He'd already seen everything. "One of them grabbed my hair. He tried to pull me out of the car," she said, her voice dropping. "But I didn't let go of Mia. I didn't let them touch her." Something cracked in Vincent's eyes. He turned and walked into the house. Grace followed, not knowing what else to do. They went into the sitting room, where Marcus was already waiting with a detailed report. "It was Ricci's men," Marcus said, voice tight. "They followed the vehicle from the moment it left the estate. The target was Mia, but they also wanted to take you, Grace." Vincent stood with his back to them, staring out the window. Silence stretched. Then, without warning, he spun and drove his fist into the wall beside him. The plaster split. Blood welled from Vincent's knuckles. But he didn't seem to feel it. There was only rage, savage, and frightening. "I'm going to kill every last one of them," Vincent snarled, his voice like an animal's. "One by one. Ricci, and anyone who dares touch my daughter, touch my people." Grace was too afraid to move. She'd never seen Vincent like this. This wasn't the man who read bedtime stories. This wasn't the gentle father she'd come to know. This was the ghost. A devil. The man all of New York feared. But then she thought of Mia. Of the little girl upstairs, shaking and terrified. Of those brown eyes filled with fear as she cried. Like when Mom. Grace stepped forward and placed her hand on Vincent's arm. "Mia needs her father," she said, gentle but firm. "Mia needs you calm. She's scared. She needs to see you strong, not out of control." Vincent went still. The fury in his eyes began to fade when he heard his daughter's name. He looked down at Grace's hand on his arm, then up at her face. "You're not afraid of me." His voice was rough. "After everything you saw today, you're not afraid of me." Grace thought about it. She'd seen Vincent punch a wall apart. She'd seen the terrifying violence in him. She knew he was a killer, a mafia boss. But she'd also seen him cry over his daughter's drawing. She'd seen him hold Mia as if she were the whole world. "No," she said, honest. "I'm not afraid of you." Vincent looked at her for a long time. Then he did something she didn't expect. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "Your family," he whispered against her ear, his voice trembling. "You and Mia are my family, and I'll burn the whole world to protect you both. Do you understand?" The whole world. Grace stood in Vincent's embrace, hearing his heart pound against her ear. And she knew that no matter how dangerous this world was, she wasn't going to leave, because this was her home, her family. In the days after the attack, Grace couldn't stop thinking about the moment Vincent held her in the sitting room, about the way his voice trembled when he said, "Your family," about how he looked at her as if she were something precious, something that had to be protected at any cost. Every night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart racing whenever Vincent's face rose in her mind. She loved him. She couldn't deny it anymore. But who was he? Vincent Moretti, the ghost, a mafia boss, a man who'd punched a wall apart in fury, who'd declared he would kill every one of them with eyes that held no mercy. The man she'd once heard handling a traitor in the dark, his voice cold as ice. How could she love someone like that? How could she dare to love someone like that? Grace needed to talk to someone. She needed advice, someone to tell her what to do. And the only person she trusted was Maggie. That afternoon, Grace went to the nursing home. This time she went alone, without bringing Mia. She needed privacy to say things she couldn't say in front of a child. Maggie was sitting by the window as always, white hair glinting in the late afternoon sun. When she saw her granddaughter step in with a face full of worry, she opened her arms. "What is it, my love?" Grace knelt beside the wheelchair, resting her head on Maggie's lap the way she had when she was little, and she told her everything. About the attack, about how Vincent reacted, about his arms around her, about the words, "your family," and about the feeling that was choking the breath out of her. "I love him, Grandma," Grace whispered, voice thick. "I don't know when it happened, but I love him. I really do." Maggie stayed quiet for a long moment, fingers stroking Grace's hair. Then she asked, calm as ever, "How does he treat you?" Grace lifted her head, thinking of the way Vincent watched her, of the way he checked on her every day, cared about her health, made sure she had everything she needed, of the way he stood in the doorway of the playroom, looking at her and Mia with a tenderness he tried to hide, of the way he held her hand on the balcony on Mia's birthday, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Like treasure, Grandma," she said softly. "He treats me like treasure." Maggie smiled, the gentle smile of someone who'd lived nearly 80 years. "Then you already have your answer." "But Grandma," Grace broke down, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's a criminal, a killer. He does terrible things. I can't love a man like that. I shouldn't love a man like that." Maggie lifted her granddaughter's chin and looked straight into her eyes. Old eyes, but clear, holding the wisdom of an entire life. "Love doesn't choose the circumstances, sweetheart," she said slowly. "Love doesn't ask what a person does for a living, what class they come from, what kind of past they carry. Love comes. It comes without warning and without permission. And once it's here, you can't run from it." "But I know who he is," Maggie cut in. "I know what he does. I'm not naive. But I also know what matters more. He loves you. He protects you. He treats you like family." She paused and squeezed Grace's hand. "The question isn't what kind of man he is. The question is whether he chooses you, and whether you choose him." Grace sobbed, her head dropping back onto Maggie's lap. She didn't know what to do. Her heart pulled one way, her mind another. She was torn between love and fear, between longing and morality. Maggie stroked her hair, voice gentle. "Sweetheart, life is short. I've lived long enough to know that. Don't miss happiness because you're afraid. If he loves you, if you love him, hold on to it. Trust your heart." Grace sat there in Maggie's arms, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future. A future with Vincent, with Mia, with a family, and that, as frightening as it was more beautiful than anything she'd ever dared to dream. That night, after Grace tucked Mia into bed and read her a story until the child fell asleep, she stepped out onto the balcony for fresh air, the way she usually did. Maggie's words were still echoing in her mind. Does he choose you? And do you choose him? The question kept circling, refusing to leave her alone. Footsteps behind her. Grace didn't need to turn to know who it was. Vincent walked onto the balcony and stopped beside her. He wasn't wearing a suit the way he did during the day. Just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly mussed. He looked different like this. Younger, softer, less of that frightening, icy edge he carried in public. They stood in silence for a long time, both looking down at the garden under the moonlight. Then Vincent spoke, his voice low and quiet. "I've never told anyone about my past," he said. "Not Marcus, not anyone. Only Isabella knew. And now I want you to know." Grace turned to him and waited. Vincent stared out into the distance, as if he were looking into another time, another life. "My father was a small tailor in Brooklyn. He worked 16 hours a day to feed the family. My mother stayed home with me and my little sister. We were poor, but we were happy." He paused, jaw tightening. "Until I was 12. Grace stayed silent, feeling the pain in every word. "My father couldn't pay the protection money to the local mafia. One night, they came to our house. They beat him in front of my mother, in front of me and my sister. Then they shot him, right there in our living room." Vincent's voice shook. "I watched my father die. His blood soaked into the rug my mother had woven. I couldn't do anything. I was only a 12-year-old boy, terrified and helpless." Tears rose in Grace's eyes. She reached out and touched Vincent's arm, a small gesture of comfort. "My mother never recovered," Vincent continued. "She broke. Depression, then illness. She died when I was 17. My sister was sent to an orphanage. And me." He gave a bitter, hollow laugh. "I joined the Mafia. The very world that killed my father. Not the same crew. A rival. I joined to get revenge." "And you got it?" Grace asked softly. "It took 10 years. Vincent nodded. 10 years to climb from the bottom to the top. 10 years doing the worst things a person can do. Killing, torture, threats. I became the monster I used to hate." He turned to Grace, eyes full of pain. "I'm not a good man, Grace. I've done things that can't be forgiven. There's blood on my hands, darkness in my soul. I don't deserve your kindness." Grace looked at him, into eyes carrying so much guilt and hurt. She thought of what Maggie had said, how people weren't only black or white, how love didn't choose the circumstances. "Then why are you telling me?" she asked. Vincent stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Because I want you to know who I am, who I truly am, before I say what I need to say." Grace's heart raced. "What?" Vincent lifted his hand and brushed her cheek. His hand was warm, and it trembled slightly, as if he were afraid. "The most powerful mafia boss in New York, afraid in front of a broke nurse from Brooklyn." "I love you, Grace," he said, voice rough. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe that stormy night, when you opened the door even though you had nothing. Maybe when you cooked your last can of beans for Mia and lied that you'd already eaten. Maybe when you held my daughter and promised to protect her. I don't know. I only know that now. I can't imagine a life without you." Tears slid down Grace's face. She didn't try to stop them. "I don't deserve you," Vincent went on. "I know that. But with you, I want to be better. I want to change. I want to become a man you can be proud to stand beside." He paused, eyes searching hers. "You don't have to feel the same. I just need you to know." Grace looked at the man in front of her, at the hurt and hope in his eyes, at the hand trembling against her cheek, and she knew that whatever her mind might say, her heart had made its choice a long time ago. "I love you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I tried telling myself this was wrong. But I can't. I love you, Vincent. All of you. Your dark past. Your dangerous present. Everything." Vincent stared at her, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Then he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to refuse if she wanted to. She didn't refuse. Their lips met, gentle, warm, full of promise. It wasn't the kiss of burning passion. It was the kiss of two souls finding each other after so much loss and pain. The kiss of real love. When they parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "I'll protect you," he whispered. "At any cost. You and Mia. You're everything to me." Grace smiled, tears still on her cheeks. "I know." And in that quiet night, under a bright moon, two people from two different worlds finally belonged to each other. They didn't know what the future would bring. They didn't know what storms were waiting, but they would face them together, because they were family. In the days after the night they confessed their feelings, Grace felt as if she were living inside a dream. Vincent was still busy with his work, but every evening he came home early, ate dinner with her and Mia, read to his daughter until she fell asleep, then spent time with Grace. They talked for hours on the balcony, holding hands, sharing the smallest things. Grace had never been this happy, but happiness in the Mafia world never lasted. That morning, Grace was playing with Mia in the playroom when Vincent's phone rang. She didn't pay attention, kept helping Mia fit the puzzle pieces together. But a few minutes later, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. The door flew open. Vincent stood there, face drained of color, eyes full of fear and fury. "Grace, come out, now." Grace's heart clenched at the sound of his voice. She told Mia to keep playing, then stepped into the hallway. Vincent seized her hand and led her into the office, where Marcus was already waiting, his expression tight. "What is it?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. Vincent looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her feel as if she might collapse. "Maggie," he said, his voice rough. Ricci took her. Grace went rigid. The world around her seemed to cave in. No, it couldn't be. Maggie, her grandmother, the only person she had left in this world. "They broke into the nursing home this morning," Marcus said, his voice strained. 2 security guards were injured. She was taken before we could respond. Grace felt her knees give way. Vincent caught her, pulling her into his arms. But she couldn't feel anything. Only fear and guilt swallowing her from the inside out. Ricci sent a message, Vincent went on, hatred thick in every word. "He wants to trade Maggie for you. He called you the blonde girl. He knows you matter to me, and he wants to use you to bring me down." Grace broke into sobs. This was her fault. All of it was her fault. If she hadn't come here, if she hadn't fallen in love with Vincent, Maggie wouldn't be in danger. Maggie was nearly 80, frail, and now she was in the hands of cruel Mafia men, because of Grace. "I'm sorry," she cried, shaking. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. My grandmother, this isn't your fault." Vincent gripped her shoulders and made her look into his eyes. "This is Ricci's fault, and he's going to pay. We have to do something." Grace's voice rose, almost a scream. "She can't hold on for long. She needs her medicine. She needs care." "I know," Vincent said, forcing control into his voice. "We'll get her back, but you have to hide. I'm going to take you and Mia somewhere safe. Then I'll deal with Ricci." "No." Grace shook her head, eyes red, but her voice suddenly hard. "I'm not hiding while my grandmother's in danger. She's here because of me. She was taken because of me. I have to be there. Grace, this is Mafia. This is Ricci. He'll kill you the moment he gets the chance." "Then don't give him the chance." Grace held Vincent's gaze. She was terrified enough to shake, but she thought of Maggie, of the wrinkled hands that had held her after her parents died, of the warm voice that had taught her everything she knew. She couldn't abandon her. "I have a plan," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Ricci wants me, right? Then let him see me. I'll go to the meeting point and distract him. While I do that, Marcus and your team attack from behind and get my grandmother out." "Not a chance," Vincent roared. "I'm not letting you be bait. It's the only way." Grace grabbed his hand. "If you attack head-on, Ricci will kill her immediately. He needs me alive for the trade. If I show up, he'll focus on me. That's your opening." Vincent stared at her, pain cutting through his eyes. He knew she was right. This was the only way. But the thought of Grace anywhere near Ricci made him feel like he was going insane. "If anything happens to you," he choked out. Grace lifted her hand and touched his cheek. "You promised you'd protect me, remember? I trust you." Vincent closed his eyes, pressing her hand into his face. Then he opened them again, and what she saw there was iron, hard resolve. "I'll protect you," he said, like an oath. "With my life. Ricci won't lay a hand on you. Not a single hair." Grace nodded, tears still falling. She held Vincent tight, as if it might be the last time. "Bring my grandmother back," she whispered, "and come back to me." "I promise," Vincent said. "I'll bring you both back. Maggie and you, both of you." They had 2 hours to prepare. 2 hours before facing the most dangerous enemy of the Moretti family. 2 hours before Grace would have to walk into the lair of the devil. And she was ready. The meeting point was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Brooklyn. Grace sat in the car, staring at the ruined building ahead, forcing herself to steady the wild pounding of her heart. A tiny microphone was hidden beneath the collar of her blouse, linked to Vincent's team lying in wait a few hundred meters away. Vincent had kissed her one last time before she got in the car, his eyes heavy with pain and fear. "I'll be right outside," he'd said. "Just stall for time. When you hear gunfire, get down immediately." Grace had nodded, even though inside she was so frightened she wanted to run. But she thought of Maggie, of those old eyes full of love, of the warm voice that had taught her that kindness is always repaid. She couldn't abandon her. Grace stepped out of the car and walked toward the warehouse on legs that trembled, yet carried her forward with steady steps. The warehouse door opened, and 2 large men came out, guns pointed straight at her. They searched her, took her phone, then escorted her inside. Grace prayed they wouldn't find the microphone. Inside, the warehouse was dark and damp. The only light came from a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and in the middle of the room, Grace saw what made her heart break clean in two. Maggie sat on a wooden chair, her hands tied behind her back, her mouth gagged. Her aged eyes widened when she saw her granddaughter, filled with fear and pain. But she was alive. She was still here. "Grandma." Grace wanted to run to her, but a hand stopped her. Anthony Ricci stepped out of the shadows. He was around 50, hair streaked with gray, his face hardened by years and marked by a long scar along his left cheek. His eyes were cold and cruel, watching Grace the way a predator watches prey. "So this is the blonde girl Moretti treasures so much." Ricci gave a thin smile, his voice dripping with contempt. "I figured you'd have to be breathtaking to make the ghost lose his mind. But looking at you, there's nothing special." Grace swallowed hard, fighting to stay calm. She needed to buy time. She needed to give Vincent time to get into position. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, but held under control. "What do I want?" Ricci laughed loudly. "I want to destroy Moretti. I want to take everything he has, the way he took everything from me." His wife was the first step. "Now it's your turn." He moved closer, eyes narrowing. "You think Moretti really loves you? Don't be naive. You're a toy, a replacement for his dead wife. When he's bored, he'll throw you away like garbage." Anger rose in Grace, pushing back even the fear. She looked Ricci straight in the eye, and for the first time, she didn't shake. "You don't understand anything about love," she said, her voice strangely calm. "You only understand hatred and violence. You will never understand why someone would sacrifice everything for the person they love. Why I'm standing here, even knowing I might die. Why Vincent will do anything to protect me. You don't understand, and you never will." Ricci stared at her, surprise and fury flashing across his face. Then he laughed again, but the sound was tight, forced, brave, and useless. He drew his gun and aimed it straight at Grace. "Moretti isn't coming, and even if he does, he can't save you." At that exact moment, an explosion thundered from behind the warehouse. Then gunshots, shouts, running footsteps. The back door burst open, and Vincent's men poured in like a storm. Everything happened in a blink. Grace saw Ricci swing the gun back toward her, saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She closed her eyes, waiting for the final shot. But that shot didn't come from Ricci's gun. Grace opened her eyes and saw Ricci collapse, blood spilling from his shoulder. Behind him, Vincent stood with a gun in his hand, his eyes burning with rage and relief. He had fired faster, a fraction of a second, but enough to save her life. Chaos raged on around them. Ricci's men fought Vincent's team. Gunfire, screams, crashing objects. But Grace saw nothing except Vincent. He ran to her and pulled her into his arms, crushing her close as if he feared she might disappear. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" he demanded, hands moving over her, checking her. "I'm okay." Grace sobbed against his chest. "I'm okay. My grandmother. Marcus is getting her out." Grace turned. Marcus had cut Maggie's bonds and was gently helping her to her feet. Maggie trembled, but she was safe. Her aged eyes searched for Grace through the confusion, and when she saw Grace in Vincent's arms, she smiled. A weak smile, but full of quiet satisfaction. Grace ran to Maggie and wrapped her in a fierce embrace, tears pouring down. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let you be in danger." "Shh, my girl." Maggie stroked her hair, her voice weak but warm. "I'm fine. I knew you'd come. I trusted you." Vincent stood behind them, watching grandmother and granddaughter cling to each other. When Maggie lifted her gaze to him, there was no longer the doubt she'd carried the first time Grace spoke of him. Only gratitude and acceptance. "Thank you," she said to Vincent. "Thank you for saving my granddaughter. Thank you for loving her." Vincent nodded. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. Maggie looked from Grace to Vincent, then smiled again. The gentle, knowing smile of someone who had lived nearly 80 years and seen enough of life to recognize what mattered. "I told you, Grace," she said, her voice faint but firm. "Kindness is always repaid. Always." 6 months had passed since the night Maggie was rescued. 6 months of changes Grace never would have dared to dream about. Vincent kept his promise. He stepped away from most of the illegal operations tied to the Moretti family, handed them off to others, and kept only the legitimate businesses. Restaurants, hotels, real estate, still wealthy, still powerful, but no longer soaked in blood. Ricci had been arrested and was waiting for trial. The greatest threat was gone, and for the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti began living like an ordinary man. Maggie recovered fully and remained at the private medical facility Vincent had arranged. She was healthier than she'd been in years, often coming to the estate to spend time with Mia and cook the foods Grace had loved since childhood. Mia called her grandma and adored her as if they were truly related by blood. One spring afternoon, Vincent told Grace he wanted to take her and Mia for a walk in the park. That wasn't unusual. They did it on weekends all the time. But today, something felt different. Vincent wore a white shirt instead of his usual black suit. Mia wore her prettiest pink dress and kept giggling the entire ride. Grace suspected something, but she didn't ask. They arrived at a small lake in the park, a place Vincent said he and Isabella used to bring Mia to play. The late afternoon sun scattered diamonds across the water, and cherry blossoms bloomed along both banks. It looked like a painting. Mia ran ahead of Grace, hands hidden behind her back, eyes shining. "Grace, I have something for you." She held out her hands. Resting on her tiny palm was a red velvet box. Grace stared at the box, then at Mia, then at Vincent. Her heart began to race. "Mia, this is—" "Open it," Mia urged, grinning. Grace opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was a diamond ring, simple, but sparkling under the afternoon sun. "Grace," Mia said, her voice serious in a way only a child can manage. "Do you want to be my mom?" Tears surged into Grace's eyes. She dropped to her knees, wrapped Mia in her arms, and cried so hard she couldn't speak. Then Vincent stepped forward. He went down on one knee beside his daughter and looked up at Grace with eyes full of love. "Nearly a year ago, you opened the door to me in a storm," Vincent said, his voice low and trembling. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know how dangerous I could be. You only knew a child needed help, and you opened the door." He paused, swallowing hard. "That night, you saved Mia. But you saved me too. You brought light back into my life, into this cold house, into a heart I thought was already dead. You gave me a reason to live, to change, to become better." Grace sobbed, unable to answer. "Now I want to open the door of my life to you," Vincent continued. "I want you to walk in and stay, forever, to be my wife, to be Mia's mother, to be our family." He took her hand, eyes shining. "Grace Mitchell, will you marry me?" Grace looked at the man before her, at eyes that had once been ice, now filled with warmth, at hands that had once been stained with blood, now trembling as they held hers, at a man who had once been a devil, now kneeling before her with his heart laid bare. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, 1,000,000 times yes." Vincent slid the ring onto her finger, then rose and pulled her into a tight embrace. Mia jumped between them and hugged them both, beaming. "I have a mom. I have a mom." The wedding took place a month later in the rose garden of the estate. Not large, not flashy, only the people closest to them. Marcus stood as best man. Mia was the flower girl, beautiful in a little white dress, scattering rose petals along the aisle, and Maggie sat in the first row, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, her smile radiant. When Grace spoke her vows, she looked at Vincent and spoke from the deepest place in her heart. "Nearly a year ago, I was sitting on the floor of a shabby apartment, counting $23 and thinking my life was over. Then there was a knock at the door. I opened it because a child needed help. I didn't know that behind that door was my entire life." She paused, tears falling. "You, Mia, the family I'd always longed for, the happiness I never dared to dream of." She squeezed Vincent's hand. "Thank you for knocking on my door in the storm. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for giving me a new life." Vincent kissed her, and applause rose across the garden. Watching them, Maggie smiled and whispered to herself, "Kindness is always repaid. I told you so." Grace and Vincent's story is proof of something simple, yet deeply true. Kindness is never wasted. One small act, one door opened on a stormy night, can change an entire life. Not only the life of the one who receives, but also the life of the one who gives. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin in moments that seem ordinary. When we choose kindness over fear, when we choose to help instead of turning away, when we choose love instead of judgment. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more moving stories every day. Tap like and share to spread this message to more people. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had a moment when a small act changed your life, or someone else's? Share with us in the comments below. We would truly love to hear what's in your heart. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish you and your family strong health, peaceful days, and a life filled with love. And remember, kindness is always repaid. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.